back once again to the Necro Zoo. I am Bone.
Oh, yeah.
In this one, let's go ahead and add one more figure to my McFarlane DC Multiverse collection. Now, today we will take a look at from the collector's edition Power Girl. Now, although this is a somewhat highly anticipated figure, it is still a little bit disappointing. Now, this is very interesting. The reason being that this figure is about 95% well executed, but there's that 5% that really leaves a lot to be desired, kind of ruining the figure. It just depends on how you look at it and what you want to use her for. But we'll take a look at all of that and show how I modified her to make her a little bit more palatable. Now, she does look pretty astounding in the packaging, but let's go ahead and take a closer look at her. But first, she does come with a black DC Multiverse stamp. Now, the collector's edition do have a silver stamped DC logo on them, but once again, not really needed, but sometimes they do come in useful. She also has her data file card, beautiful image of the character, Kara Zor-El from the comics. If you look it up online, look up some images for source material. Beautiful character, just really easy on the eyes. A lot of images are really cool. Now, this makes it so that there's a lot of people that are Power Girl fans and really put her up on a pedestal, especially this version of Kara, because there's a lot of different versions. And for me, that kind of takes us into it depends on how you look at this character and what she brings to the table for you will depend on how much you enjoy her or not. But yeah, these collector's edition cards are a little bit more fancy. On the back, they do have some information. We'll go ahead and hold on to this. But as I said, looking her up online, there are just so many beautiful images of Power Girl. She has been portrayed in a lot of different medias, which is awesome. Animation, and different versions of her in the comics. So we'll talk a little bit of that later on, but she does come with some accessories. Of course, this time she comes with open splayed hands, but you also receive two alternate fists, which you really need for Power Girl. So that's a positive. Now, a negative is I do not understand why McFarlane gave her two trigger hands. I mean, if you really wanted to, you could pose her with some guns just to, do an out of this world pose just to make it interesting. Really a head scratcher that they give her two trigger hands, but we'll accept them and of course add them to the fodder collection. And finally, you get Scratches the cat here. Super cat, you can tell by the cape. Nice little paint design on the sides. Not too much to the cat. It's a fun little accessory. McFarlane has given us many animals in the line up till now. Stands really nicely, but the negative is there's no articulation to speak of, not even on the head or the tail. So that is, a little bit of a downer. And that's what I come to see about this figure is while it does have a lot of cool positive aspects, you get in those little negative things that just bring her down to not being a really great figure. And one of those things is huge. But let's, take a more detailed look at her and see what we're working with. Now, I did pick up 5 of these. So I did get the platinum edition. I did get some extra standard edition. So even though I went ahead and modified mine and did some custom work, I still have one to have in its original form. But maybe I may not even use that because I like her more in my customized version. But we'll look at the standard version and then see the changes that I did. But first impressions, like I said, in hand, when you first get her, it is a great figure. I mean, looks good. They got all the details right. I mean, she looks good. The colors, everything pops. I mean, great looking figure at first glance in hand. Now, one thing that is different is that you, with all the images of her online, this specific version, you have to kind of take details from one Power Girl, the hair from one Power Girl, the belt from one Power Girl. So it's kind of an amalgamy of versions of the character. But for someone that doesn't know all the details, this is just your standard good looking Power Girl. So once again, I have to say, if someone just buys this and wants her for display to stand on her own on your desk, or have her displayed in your office solo in a corner or something like that, she is perfect. Looks good. Legs a little bit long, but even when you pose her and stuff like that, you can't even tell if that is what you're planning on doing with her. But it's once you get into adding her with the rest of the DC Multiverse line that we're going to run into a little bit of a pickle. But first impressions, great looking figure. Even taking a closer look at the head sculpt, once again, not a 10 out of 10, but it's definitely up there. It's a good head sculpt. They gave her a nice stern look, which a lot of the times she does have in comics. Now, we might have enjoyed a little bit of that faceplate technology to get her smiley and get a face with a little bit more anger. But this is what we got. We got just her standard Kara head sculpt. Now, in the platinum, she does have some red heat vision eyes, which give her a little bit more of an attitude. But the standard head is fine for simple poses and display. Now, she does have that Karen hair, which is from the comics, but in certain versions of her. But it does look very clean. Now, let's take a look at the articulation. This is one of the only times I'm going to say this, and her head looks a little bit high on the pig. This time, usually the problem is it sits too low. This time it seems a little bit high. So she could look down way, her chin touches her chest very easily. And she could look up a slight bit. I mean, not too much, but her head sitting so high and the hair being so thick would restrict her articulation if it was too low. But since it's pretty high, you get a lot of range of movement. You got right to left, and you can tilt her head for some character. So, all in all, great looking head sculpt, great looking figure. Go down, of course, you see the bosoms, which is one of Power Girl's, main characteristics. It's what she's known for. And, they didn't skimp out on the fullness. The cleavage is definitely there. I'm glad they went ahead and went all out and gave her that open costume, really displaying her assets. And for the most part, her costume is straight out of the pages of the comics. She has that socket and shoulder bushing articulation in the shoulder, bicep swivel, double jointed elbows. Everything's good, works very nice. Now, there is no waist crunch, but they've done that with the Wonder Woman as well. Kind of limits the articulation, but it's not so much of a detractor that it takes away. Keeps the sculpt lines, doesn't break up the sculpt, having that full torso down into the legs. Man, the legs are really tight. You get almost no swivel at the hips. You can move her legs around, but a little bit restricted with the cut of her trunks. Now, a big negative that I've never liked about this body buck, which they've used on Superwoman and Wonder Woman, is the knee cut. I don't know. I do not know why. They just went in and chopped it this way. You can see if you bend it at the top part of the knee, you get that ugly gap. I mean, it's not a big distraction if she's posing on a flight stand or something like that. But for me, it is very unappealing. So I usually bend her legs more, at the lower part of the knee and try not to split that sculpt at the top. It just looks pretty horrendous. You got the boots, a new sculpt with detail, a little bit of added gold paint on the buckles there, and you have articulation in the ankles. Now that we've looked at her pretty much, I mean, she is your standard Power Girl figure. She has a nice wired posable cloth cape, which is pretty good. That's not nothing negative. That ties in very well with the shoulder pauldron up on top. So, all in all, a nice looking figure. But now we're going to get into the big negative. And of course, the big negative is her size. When I first got her out of the package and moved her around, I did put her next to some other figures. I put her next to a Hush Batman because, as you know, that's one of the tallest McFarlane figures that we have. And I mean, if she's a crocodile whisker, shorter than him, that's giving it a lot. She does kind of look like they're almost the same size, and that's just pretty huge.
That's a huge bitch.
Now there is certain ways you can look at this because I remember her a lot from Justice League Europe, and in that comic, she was basically the same size as all of the male characters. They didn't draw her as being a smaller, petite girl. They drew her pretty much around the same size as Captain Atom. So that's one way you could look at it, but the costumes are a little bit different. So that kind of might not work for some people. She is definitely out of scale, which is sad. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this, and the main reason being they use the same legs as Wonder Woman, but they added the new boots. And when they added the new boots, they were so long that they added a lot of height, especially the upper ankle part. But once you strap on these boots that have like a high heel, that made her even taller. And as I said before, her head sits really high on her neck, which I think they did to give her more articulation. But it adds even more to her tallness, which makes her just out of scale.
Hey, keep it in the circus.
So I had to attack this and do a little bit of elbow work and get her more to my liking. Now, I recently did my Superman mods, and if you take a lot of the modifications that I did on that Superman and port them onto this figure, you can get her a lot more posable and shorten her down a little bit. So although in her original form looks good on display, great for posability, great for flying poses, but once you get her on the ground, it's a little bit iffy. So I did have to do some changes. First of all, I shortened her neck peg, but I did add the mods to her hair and the cutout to the back of the porthole, which allows her still to look down and look up a little bit more, even than before, by trimming down the back of the hair. So that added articulation to her, and at the same time, it dropped her height, a little bit of millimeters for the overall effect. She had a little bit of a gap on her shoulder between the pauldron and her cape, so I glued that together to get a cleaner look, and you can still manipulate the shoulder. Another thing I wasn't a fan of was the cut of her trunks, which were a little bit wide, giving her that big fupa look. So I trimmed it down and gave it a sleeker cut, more appealing to the eye than those big bloomers. And we get into the thighs. Now, I showed this before. You take it all apart, you shave some of the inside of the plastic because it is really thick, and that's why you're not getting a lot of movement. Put it all back together, and now she does have a lot more thigh swivel. You can see this if you pop her leg up and move it from side to side. You can see all of the swivel that you get at that hip. Plus, changing the cut on the trunks allows you to lift her leg even higher and pull back as well. So, all of that adds to the dexterity and articulation. Now we go down into the boots, and this is the way I did it. I went ahead and removed the boots from the legs, which you can do, and then I chopped off a good portion of her lower leg. Now, she does have a little peg that fits inside of the boot, but I did cut a good piece off of her legs, which I still have right here. So you can see it's a pretty nice big chunk that I cut off on each side. Now, I cut off the little peg that goes into the boot and I glued that back in to keep her leg solid. And I warmed it up and shaped it around the plastic so that the boot wouldn't look too bulky and too loose to where I got it to where I was pretty happy with it. Now, I could do a better job. This is, just one that I did. But for right now, for all intents and purposes, it did work out sufficiently enough and reduced her height by a lot. So once I had it the way I wanted, super glued it all together, and now she looks a lot better. Still posable, great for figure photography. And when you stand her back with that hush, Batman, she's not, taller than him. She's, almost a head shorter than him now. So that really worked out well. Now you can pop off those open splayed hands and add a fist very easily. This is something that McFarlane has worked out very well. And really a lot of fun to pose and display, especially with the added articulation and the reduced height. It just, makes her feel a lot better in hand. Now you can really tell if you put her next to the Platinum Edition, you can tell how tall she was and now how tall she is after my modifications to her. Now, even the standard version, even the Platinum version, if you stand them in a certain way, they can look shorter. So that's, one option. You can always put her in a flight stand, which surrounded by other characters will really hide the fact that she's, way taller.
Freak!
But if you do the work and modify her as I did, then you have a more reasonably sized Power Girl. Now, once again, I got multiples of her, so I can do this because I can always, open up another one and have a standard release or do another custom job, just whatever I feel like I want to do. And once again, as I said, like I brought out this Superman from Earth 2, and now he is a little bit taller than her, where before she she was exactly the same size as him. And once again, depending on how you pose them, you can adjust the way the height looks, but this is one of those things where there's different kinds of people in the world. Some people get dealt a bad hand and they just roll up in a ball and, cry to mama. But there's people like me that don't get what they want exactly, but they adjust and fight on and enjoy the simple things in life. So it is what you make out of it. You can be disappointed, but you can also be really excited and really pleased. So, very interesting figure to say the least. I mean, a lot of people are happy to have a Power Girl. Don't know how happy they'll be when they see her scale, but as always, there is ways to work around it. But, anyways, you guys keep hunting out there, keep collecting, keep customizing, and I will see you on the next one.
They used to call me Crazy Joe, but now they can call me Batman.